Story 2: Eternal Darkness. Sarah loved to read. She loved immersing herself in different worlds, meeting interesting characters, and feeling adventure and excitement. She loved fantasy, science, historical, and romantic novels. But what she loved most of all were horror stories. She loved the feeling of fear, suspense, and mystery. She loved stories that would put her to sleep with the light on. So, when she heard about a new book called Eternal Darkness, she didn't hesitate to buy it. The book was written by an unknown author, and had no information about it on the cover or last page. All that was there was the title of the book and a picture of a closed door with a warning sign saying, "Do not open." The book seemed interesting and mysterious. Sarah was excited to read it. That night, Sarah returned to her small apartment, made a cup of tea, and lay down in bed. She took the book from her bag and opened it. There was no title page, index, or introduction. The story was starting right away. Sarah began to read, immersed in the words. The story was about a man called David, who worked as a private investigator. He was tracking a serial killer, who was killing his victims in horrific ways, and leaving behind mysterious messages written in blood. The killer called himself the Eternal Darkness, and claimed to work at the behest of a higher power. David was determined to stop him, reveal his identity, and find out his motives. Sarah was fascinated by the story. She felt nervous, curious, and terrified. The writer describes the scenes with realistic and frightening details. It created an atmosphere of terror and mystery. It was making Sarah wonder what would happen next, who the killer was, and what higher power he was following. She was reading quickly, skipping pages. But after a few hours had passed, Sarah began to feel something else. Something you've never felt before. Something strange and disturbing. Something is wrong. Sarah began to feel that the story was affecting her in an unnatural way. She begins to feel like she is not just a reader, but part of the story. She begins to feel that she is living what David is living, seeing what he sees, and hearing what he hears. She begins to feel that she is communicating with the killer, receiving his messages, and confronting him. She started to feel in danger. Sarah tried to ignore this feeling, and considered it merely an effect of the story. I tried to focus on reading, and enjoy the story. But the feeling didn't go away. Rather, it has become stronger and clearer. Sarah began to feel afraid and terrified. She began to feel that she was not in her apartment, but somewhere else. A dark, cold and terrifying place. A place called Eternal Darkness. Sarah wanted to stop reading, close the book, and forget everything. But she couldn't. She was addicted to the story. She wanted to know the ending. She wanted to know who the killer was, what a higher power was, and what would happen to David. She wanted to know what would happen to her. Sarah continued reading, not looking at the clock. She did not notice that the night had passed, and that the sun had risen. She didn't notice that her phone had rang, and that her friend had called her. She did not notice that the door to her apartment had opened, and that her mother had entered. She didn't notice anything, except the book. Sarah's mother was worried about her. "You haven't heard from her for 2 days. I tried to call her, but she didn't answer. I decided to go to her apartment, check it out. Maybe she was sick, busy, or in trouble." Sarah's mother loved her daughter and cared for her. Sarah's mother arrived at Sarah's apartment, and used the spare key to open the door. She entered the apartment, and called, "Sarah? Pleasant? Are you here?" Didn't hear any response. I felt anxious. Looking around, she saw that the apartment was a mess. Pots and dishes were piled up in the kitchen. Clothes and papers were scattered in the hall. The lights, TV and computer were on. She looked like she hadn't left the apartment in days. Sarah's mother went to Sarah's bedroom and opened the door. What she saw there made her scream out loud. Above the bed, she saw Sarah dead. Her eyes were open, as if looking at her. In her hand, she was holding a book. A black book, with a red title, Eternal Darkness. Sarah's mother collapsed on the floor and started crying. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She couldn't understand what happened. How did Sarah die? What is this book? What story was she reading? What is its relationship to her death? And at that moment, I heard another voice. A voice that does not belong to this world. A frightening and terrifying sound. A voice says, "Welcome to eternal darkness."